In this video, we'll be looking at the Munich Putsch and the lean years for the Nazi Party between 1923 to 9. And overall, this is about explaining the development of the Nazi Party in these early years. In particular, we're going to go over the reasons for, events and consequences of the Munich Putsch of 1923, which is what you can see in this picture here. The reasons for the limited support of the Nazi Party, the party reorganisation and the writing of Kampf, and the Bamberg Conference of 1926. So first of all, we're going to focus on the causes of the Munich Putsch, an event that I mentioned in an earlier video, but we're going to go into more detail here. So there are both long-term, medium-term and short-term causes of the Putsch, and we're going to start with long-term causes. So firstly, there was a great deal of resentment towards the Weimar Republic from a whole range of people, as seen earlier on in the Spartacist uprising, in the Kampf Putsch, but also just the general resentment about the stab in the back, the loss of the land through the Treaty of Versailles, and the high amount of reparations the Germans had to pay, all of which were blamed on the Weimar Republic. Alongside this, the NSDAP had been growing their support in South Germany, in particular Munich in Bavaria. And in fact, by 1923, they had 50,000 members, they had their own private army, the SA, and were becoming more and more popular. This was helped by the fact the local government in Bavaria was also quite anti-Weimar, so they shared some of the nationalist views of the NSDAP, and so turned a blind eye to their violence and some of their more illegal tactics. In the medium term, the NSDAP were also heavily influenced by a party from Italy known as the Fascists. Now this party was led by Benito Mussolini, a key figure for many nationalist movements, and actually someone that Hitler modelled himself on in the early years. Mussolini himself had led a march on Rome in 1922, where he had successfully overthrown the democratic government and installed himself as leader. And in the short term, we know that there was massive hyperinflation in 1923 due to the government printing money to pay workers and to try and pay off the reparations, and this was having a devastating effect on the economy. But also there had been the invasion of the Ruhr by France and Belgium, and there's mass unemployment and huge problems associated with this. So overall, there was anger towards the failure of Weimar. So in November 1923, Hitler decided to make his bid for power in Munich, Bavaria. Now the story of the Munich Putsch is one of the strangest stories in German history, and to understand it you have to go back to a beer hall called the Burgerbrau Keller in Munich. Bavarian government officials, including Gustav von Kahr, the leader of the state government, were meeting in a beer hall. There was also von Seisser, the head of the police, and von Lossow, the head of the German army in Bavaria, were there. So a key meeting with lots of the key officials running the local government. Hitler, General Ludendorff, the war hero, and 600 SA burst in and declared they would take over a local and then national government. The Bavarian government leaders reluctantly agreed, largely as the SA and Hitler in particular were armed, so effectively they agreed at gunpoint. At the same time, Ernst Röhm, the SA leader, took over army barracks and police headquarters in the city. Now this shaky alliance of the NSDAP members and the Bavarian government leaders was not set to last. The next day, Ludendorff, who was holding the government officials, decided to release them, and it soon became clear that the three leaders no longer supported Hitler, and crucially the SA had not managed to take over the main army barracks, which remained loyal to the Bavarian government. Although hesitant, Hitler decided to continue with his putsch and marched into the town centre with 3,000 men to declare himself president. Now 1,000 of these men were SA, the other 2,000 were actually volunteer supporters, as the SA had robbed some banks and had used the money to pay for basically local thugs to back up their bid for power. However, crucially, the ordinary people of Munich were indifferent to the Nazis, and the state police backed the Bavarian government and confronted the NSDAP in the town square. After a confrontational standoff, one side started firing, and 14 NSDAP members and 4 police were killed. Some of the Nazi leaders, such as Ludendorff and Röhm, were arrested on the spot. Hitler apparently fled the scene in a car and then hid at the house of a friend, and eventually was found hiding in a cupboard and was arrested. So the initial consequences of the Munich Putsch were all very negative for the Nazi Party. Several key leaders were put on trial. Now, interestingly, General Ludendorff was found not guilty, though most people think this is because he was a war hero rather than to do with his actions or lack of action in the Putsch. And Hitler and 3 other Nazi leaders were sentenced to 5 years in prison for treason. In itself interesting, treason often being the highest crime in a society. However, they're only sentenced to 5 years. But the NSDAP were banned as a movement. Now this, obviously quite damaging turn of events, did not last for long. The NSDAP, in fact, put up candidates in the next election under a different party name and did relatively well. But probably more importantly, Hitler decided he needed to build up nationwide support. Although he did not believe in the Weimar government or democracy, he realised he needed more support to take over power. The NSDAP ban was lifted very quickly in February 1925. And Hitler wrote down his key ideas in prison. In his book, Mein Kampf, or My Struggle, he was able to articulate the ideas that would later form the basis of a lot of his policies. And probably most importantly, Hitler was able to use his trial to get national publicity and to become the individual who had stood up to the Weimar government and had started to offer a different alternative. Now, Hitler's struggle, Mein Kampf, had its key ideas down in paper for the first time. He used his time in prison to read and write his ideas down and actually do a fair amount of research for these policies. And there were 5 main areas that he covered in his book. First of all, then probably most famously, was his inherent racism, in that he believed the Aryan or German race was destined to rule the world, but was undermined by a Jewish conspiracy who were seeking to destroy the Aryans. So he believed that the Jews were trying to weaken the Aryan race by intermarriage and taking over German industry and represent themselves in moderate political groups such as the Social Democrat Party or SPD. But he also talked about nationalism, the idea he wanted to make Germany great by reversing the Treaty of Versailles, and in particular he wanted Germany to expand to take over all the land the German people used to have and take over a lot of the Russian land to the east. And he called this policy Lebensraum, which means living space in German. There were still strong elements of socialism, so using the wealth of industry and land to benefit ordinary working Germans, and in particular not to help the rich landowners and industrialists. He was also keen on totalitarianism, which means throwing off democracy, which Hitler believed was weak, and put all power in the hands of the state, which would preferably be led by one leader who would organise everything for the benefit of the people. And lastly, he wanted to return to traditional German values: strong family values, male and female roles, strong work ethic, Christian morality, old-style German art, music, theatre. He was very traditional in these views. The next key stage in the development of the Nazi Party was the reorganisation of the party between 1924 to 8. Now, most surprisingly, Hitler was released after just 9 months into his sentence, and then he set about reorganising the party. And most commentators believe this shows how biased the German judiciary was towards people like Hitler, that he only served 9 months of his sentence, showing the judiciary probably were pretty anti-Weimar themselves. So, this reorganisation came about in several different areas. Firstly, he put a lot of effort into the Nazi Party headquarters. He appointed a secretary and treasurer to ensure the party was financed and organised, and he made sure the party was organised like a mini-state, with Hitler as the leader, and there were different departments for all aspects of government, finance, foreign affairs, industry, etc. They had long had the SA as paramilitary arm, but they also organised a German Women's Order for the women. For young people, a National and Socialist German Students' League was created, and the Hitler Youth for 14 to 18-year-olds. So a great deal of effort went into organising the party from top to bottom. And part of this was also ensuring the National Party was growing. And what they did was they set up Gauleiters to run each of the 35 areas of Germany for the NSDAP, each one of these being known as a Gau. So these leaders were not appointed. Hitler relied on the most able people seizing power in each area. And there are two very famous ones, one called Gregor Strasser, who was a powerful Gauleiter in the north of Germany, and Joseph Goebbels, who rose to prominence in the Rhineland. To pay for all this, Hitler had to raise more finances. So he raised money from wealthy industrialists who saw the NSDAP as a way of combating communism and restoring Germany's greatness. Now this was interesting because wealthy industrialists were the people that the socialist part of the Nazi Party had been targeting in Mein Kampf and in the 25-point programme. However, as you'll see later, Hitler soon moved away from this. Lastly, he set about setting up his own private bodyguard. Now, although he had the SA, Hitler didn't completely trust the 400,000 strong organisation, so he fired their leader, Ernst Röhm, and set up an elite group called the SS under leadership of Heinrich Himmler to be his personal bodyguard. However, by 1926, it was clear that there were some splits within the party. With the growth into a national party, Hitler was no longer able to have as much control as he would like. So he called a conference in the south of Germany, called the Bamberg Conference, and attempted to seize control. Now, effectively, it was the power of the individual Gauleiters which was starting to worry Hitler, particularly Gregor Strasser and Joseph Goebbels, who were both popular northern Gauleiter. And the north was much more industrialised than the south, and so in the north, the socialist elements of National Socialism or Nazism had been very popular, and both these leaders stressed the socialist side of Nazism. He had also allied himself with wealthy industrialists who did not like these socialist elements, and effectively Hitler represented southern Germans initially, who were much more based on farms and rural, and did not worry so much about industrialisation and the wealth of these individuals. So Hitler called a conference, as I said earlier, in southern Germany to try and make sure it's nearer his power base, and allow the northern leaders to speak and express their desires for more socialist elements. He then spent 5 hours crushing their views about the dangers of socialism and communism. He spoke for 5 hours on these topics. And interestingly, Goebbels abandoned his socialist principles and became a key ally of Hitler's, while Strasser was sidelined and later assassinated. But ultimately, Hitler was able to seize control of the Nazi Party for himself. So how much support did the Nazi Party actually have in this time? By this point, they were well organised. They had secure finances, had over 100,000 members and their own private army, and it was completely under Hitler's control. However, it was still really a marginal party in Weimar Germany. Now this is for many reasons. Firstly, the country was stable and the economy seemed strong. Stresemann's new currency, the Rentenmark, and the Dawes and Young plans had ensured economic stability, and employment had gone up. Germany was also starting to be a respected member of the international community again. People felt less angry now that Germany was part of the League of Nations, and the Locarno Pact and Kehl-Briand Pact had made it clear that Germany was back on the negotiating table with the top nations of the world. And in 1925, General Hindenburg, a war hero, became the president, lending credibility to the Weimar regime and making sure that the right-wing parties were a lot more supportive of Weimar. So because of this, the Nazi Party received little to no votes in the elections in this period. And was still clearly a marginal party. So, in summary, the Munich Putsch was due to a combination of long, medium and short-term factors. Long, resentment at the Treaty of Versailles and the Weimar politicians, the growth of the Nazi Party. Medium, the example of Mussolini and fascist Italy and the March on Rome. And short-term, anger about hyperinflation, the invasion of the Ruhr and the problems of 1923. However, overall it was badly executed, and the NSDAP did not have enough support to pull it off. Hitler went to jail, but was treated very leniently by the judges and used the publicity well. And in particular, in jail, Hitler formalised his key ideas in Mein Kampf. That gave him a national platform to share them. When he was released, he reorganised the party, ensured it had financial support and made sure he had complete control of it. However, at this time, the NSDAP was still a marginal party in German politics.